Hi, I'm Stuart Russell. I served in Cameroon in 1965 to 1967, and I went back on my own in 72, 73. I was a teacher in a secondary school in the village of Bali, which was in Bamenda district in western Anglophone Cameroon, and I come from Hanover, New Hampshire.
George Cass, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Bong Bong, Cameroon, is where I spent my 2 years as a TEFL teacher in a remote small town of eastern Cameroon, whose name again I'll repeat is Bong Bong. It was a region of cannibals, and there was only one white father left, as I recall. And this was 67, 69. Okay. Well, I was plunged into Africa, equatorial Africa. I didn't have any fellow volunteer nearby, and I was working on building up my French, which I had studied but didn't really speak till I got to Cameroon. And so it was just major stimulus, discovering a culture, discovering the smell and sights of Africa, that part of Africa. And so I guess the story would be how, out of sympathy for my isolation, a year after the first year was over, the Peace Corps director in Yaoundé, the capital, suggested as a reward, because I never complained, but he thought it was quite remote, and I was going to be sent to the coast, Kribi, south of Douala, at a school there. And because an American Peace Corps volunteer had gotten married, and apparently in those days it was a no-no, and so she couldn't remain as a volunteer. And so that opened up a spot, which unfortunately the Ministry of Education of Cameroon took and sent a national. So I missed out on paradise in Kribi, Cameroon, but I had another wonderful year in the Bong Bong.
Yeah. My name's Will Smolzer, and I served in Cameroon, which is in Central Africa. That was 1967 to 1969. And I served, it wasn't a very big city, but it was still a secondary school where I taught English. In a way, I've thought a lot about that experience. I mean, it's over 40 years ago now. And yet, I haven't been back. I mean, people often ask, you know, have you been back to Africa? But in a way, that's like 2 trips to Europe, you know. It's a long, expensive trip. And I have not been back, but I think about it often. And it's a very central part of who I am, I think, as a person.
Did you? My name is Marilee Benteen. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon from September 1969 until June 1972. I was really surprised to fall in love with Africa, which wasn't on my travel list, and to, you know, discover a new continent, really. And years later, I'm walking through. This happened in Paris once. Someone yells, "Miss, Miss!" In Algiers once, "Miss, Miss!" And I look. This is when I lived in Algeria, and I was teaching English there, which grew out of the Peace Corps experience. I look at this tall young man. "Don't you recognize me?" No. And he told me his name. He was one of my music students. I didn't teach English to him, but when he was, you know, a little Cesian. So he was maybe 10 or 11, 12 at the most, you know, when I'd seen him, and he was a little short, chubby guy. And he sat in the front row, because it came back to me later. And he had an exchange scholarship to study at the University of Algiers. And he knew one of my students who talked about his American English teacher. And so
David Neff.
Okay.
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon, and then I did another tour in Liberia, in West Africa. I was worked for agricultural cooperatives in Cameroon, and I was a reforester in Liberia.
My name is Mary Younger, and I was in Cameroon, West Africa from 1974 to 76. I taught English in a college, a little middle school type place in Ebolova, which is kind of in the southern part of Cameroon. A couple things come to mind. Teaching in a classroom, I had about 45 students usually in a class, which is almost, well, it's unheard of here. But they were really good because the students were really paid attention and they really wanted to learn because it was a privilege to be in school. One thing I really remember though was at a moment's notice you had to be prepared to do a writing lesson because the roofs were made of tin or corrugated, and so if there was a rainstorm, as there was in that part of it would be this deafening sound that you couldn't hardly speak and be heard. So at a moment's notice you had to be ready for a different kind of lesson because we taught English really oral style, so boy, you had to be on your toes for those. So another thing, I like to sing, and so when I taught certain lessons, I would use words from a song and then have them sing the song for them and have them sing the song. And the kids could harmonize once they got there were simple tunes, and old Bob Dylan songs and things like that. And once they had all the words, and as I was teaching it, they kind of would get the idea. I'd be teaching the words and various sentences, and they pretty soon, Miss, is this a song? And they would be so excited because they loved to sing too. So another great experience.
Okay. Jeff Towner. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the country of Cameroon in West Africa from 1975 to 1977. And I worked in the inland fisheries program. And our program was designed to work in extension with farmers out in the countryside. First of all, explaining to them what the program was all about. And then for those who were interested, we would go and help them build a pond. Usually they didn't have a pond. We'd help them using their labor and our expertise. We'd help them build a fish pond. And then we would stock their pond with fingerlings, fish fingerlings, and then show them how to feed and fertilize their pond. And then when the fish were mature, we would go back to the village, work with the farmer and other people in the village, his family, etc., to help them drain and harvest the pond and sell the fish. And it was a very, very popular program. Well, at one point, things were going along fine. We were selling lots of fish, making lots of money, and we were going to, and we did take that money and plow it back into the fish station. But at one point, the wife of my Cameroonian boss came with her bucket and bought some fish, and we were giving people a mixture of larger fish and smaller fish. And so we filled her bucket, gave it to her. She didn't like the fish that we had selected, so she came inside our structure, dumped them back in to the wheelbarrow, and then proceeded to select the fish she wanted, and they were all large ones. So I told her, no, that's not the way it's done. So I dumped her bucket out, and I said, come out here. I took her out, took her bucket out, and let her out. And the other people really appreciated that. They were applauding. They really appreciated that because, you know, typically, you know, the norm is that people with higher status get special treatment. Fisheries volunteer did have their share of adventures on bikes. One time I remember I was going out to a village with my Cameroonian counterpart, and I carried him on the back, and all of the roads in the Eastern Province at that time were unpaved. So, you know, they were the typical kind of washboard clay roads, and we were going down this road, you know, at a fairly good clip, and something happened. Suddenly the rear tire lost pressure. I think the stem broke off or something, and it went instantly flat, and we just went right down on the ground. It was hard. We hit the ground really hard. No broken bones, but you know, we were both pretty well shaken up. And I've forgotten how we made it back to town, but we got back to town somehow. And then the next day I went over to my counterpart's house to pick him up for work, and he said, "I'm going to keep working with you even if it kills me," you know. So it was obvious he was not anxious to get back on that bike, but he was game.